My name is Melissa Hayes and I'm 32 years old. Growing up, appearances mattered more than substance in my family. My brother Jason always got everything while I settled for leftovers. When Grandpa died, everyone gathered eagerly for the will reading. Jason inherited a fortune, but I got nothing, just a worthless plot of land. My family laughed at my inheritance, calling it Grandpa's final mistake. They're not laughing anymore. Before I tell you how my family's laughter turned to desperate pleas, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated. I grew up in Lakefield, Michigan, a suburban town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Our house on Maple Street was perfectly maintained from the outside. Pristine white paint, manicured lawn, and seasonal decorations that my mother Diana changed with religious precision. But inside those walls was a different story. Our family operated on a clear hierarchy and I was firmly at the bottom. My father Robert was a bank manager who valued status above all else. My mother was a real estate agent who spent more time staging other people's homes than making ours feel warm. And then there was Jason, my older brother by 3 years. Jason was the golden child, the son who could do no wrong, the future of the Hayes family name. From our earliest years, the difference in how we were treated was obvious but never acknowledged. For Jason's 10th birthday, my parents threw an elaborate party with a hired magician, custom cake, and invitations to everyone in his grade. When my 10th birthday came around, I got a small gathering with 2 friends and store-bought cupcakes. My mother explained they were saving for Jason's upcoming soccer tournament in California. School achievements followed the same pattern. Jason's B+ grades were celebrated with dinners out. My straight A's were met with a distracted "good job, Mel," if I was lucky. When I won the state science competition in 8th grade, my father couldn't attend because he was watching Jason's baseball game, where my brother mostly warmed the bench. "Your brother needs the support," my mother explained. "You always do well on your own." My grandparents, Harold and Eleanor Hayes, lived an hour away in a modest house with a beautiful garden. While my grandmother followed my parents' lead in favoring Jason, my grandfather was different. He noticed me in ways no one else did. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Lissa," he'd say during my visits, using his special nickname for me. "And more importantly, you've got grit. That'll take you further than anything else in this world." During summer visits, while Jason was quickly bored and returned to video games, I'd help Grandpa in his workshop. He taught me to use tools to identify different wood types to see the potential in raw materials. "Most people only value what's already been shaped and polished," he told me once while sanding a rough piece of oak. "But the real treasure is seeing value in what others overlook." I didn't realize then how those quiet afternoons were preparing me for my future. High school continued the pattern of invisibility at home. My parents attended every one of Jason's football games but missed my debate team finals. When college applications came around, Jason's mediocre grades and athletic achievements earned him a partial scholarship to state, which my parents supplemented fully. For my education, despite higher grades and leadership positions, I was told I'd need student loans. "We've already stretched our college fund with Jason," my father explained. "You understand, right? Besides, you're so responsible with money." I worked 2 jobs through college while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. Jason partied through 5 years before barely graduating with a business degree. At family gatherings, his extended timeline was explained as finding himself, while my accelerated program was barely mentioned. After graduation, I knew I needed distance. I accepted a marketing position in Minneapolis, 6 hours from my hometown. The physical separation was a relief, creating natural boundaries that protected my growing sense of self-worth. Over the next decade, I built my career methodically, moving from entry-level to management through consistent performance rather than flashy achievements. I returned home only for major holidays, each visit reinforcing my decision to keep my distance. My grandfather remained my connection to family. Every Sunday at 6 p.m., my phone would ring and we'd talk about everything and nothing. He never pushed me to visit more often or made me feel guilty for building my separate life. "You bloom where you're planted, Lissa," he'd say. "And sometimes you need different soil to really grow." His calls were the one family tradition I cherished, a constant in my otherwise independent life. When my phone rang at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday instead of our usual Sunday evening, I knew something was wrong. It was my mother, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Your grandfather passed away in his sleep last night," she said without preamble. "The funeral is Saturday. We expect you to be there." Not, "I'm sorry," or "Are you okay?" Just an expectation of compliance. Even in grief, some things never changed. The funeral was held at First Presbyterian Church, where my grandparents had been members for 40 years. I arrived early to have a moment alone before facing my family. The church filled quickly. My grandfather had been well respected in the community, and soon I was squeezed into the front pew between my mother and a cousin. Jason arrived last, sliding into the reserved seat across the aisle, his wife Brittany beside him in designer black. He'd grown heavier since I'd last seen him, his face fuller, his once athletic frame now solid in different ways. He nodded briefly in my direction but didn't approach. Throughout the service I remained dry-eyed. Not because I wasn't grieving, but because my grief felt too private to share in this public setting. My mother dabbed occasionally at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, while my father sat stoically, his arm around her shoulders. After the burial, everyone gathered at my parents' house. Distant relatives and family friends offered condolences with plates of food in hand. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting sympathies from people who barely knew me, answering the same questions about my life in Minneapolis with practiced brevity. "Your grandfather was so proud of you," several people told me, which surprised me given how little my accomplishments were acknowledged within our immediate family. The following Monday we gathered at Walter Freeman's law office for the reading of the will. The room was smaller than I expected, forcing us into closer proximity than was comfortable. My parents sat rigidly in leather chairs, Jason and Brittany on a small sofa, while I perched on a chair near the window. Mr. Freeman, who had been my grandfather's attorney for decades, adjusted his glasses and began reading in a formal monotone. The preliminaries passed in a blur until he reached the distribution of assets. "To my grandson, Jason Robert Hayes, I leave my vacation property on Lake Huron. My investment portfolio currently valued at approximately $450,000, and the sum of $100,000 in cash." Jason nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected, while Brittany squeezed his arm, a small smile playing at her lips. My parents exchanged satisfied glances. "To my granddaughter, Melissa and Hayes," Mr. Freeman continued, adjusting his glasses, "I leave my undeveloped 5-acre property on County Road 7, parcel number 35-789-42, along with any structures or items contained thereon." The room went silent for a moment before my father spoke. "That's it? That's all she gets?" His tone suggested this must be a mistake. "Mr. Freeman looked up from the document. "That's what's specified in the will, yes." My mother turned to me, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and something like vindication. "Well, at least you got something," she said, though her tone implied I'd gotten nothing of value. Jason let out a short laugh. "That's just some worthless land Grandpa bought decades ago. It's in the middle of nowhere. Not even any road access," my father added, shaking his head. "Harold should have just included it with Jason's inheritance. Would have made more sense." I sat very still, absorbing their reactions while trying to maintain my composure. The property meant nothing to me. I hadn't even known my grandfather owned land there, but their obvious dismissal stung nonetheless. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Freeman asked me to stay behind for a moment. Once the others had left, he handed me an envelope. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this privately," he said. "And for what it's worth. Miss Hayes, your grandfather was a very shrewd man. I wouldn't be too quick to judge the value of your inheritance." Inside my car, I opened the envelope. A single sheet of paper contained a brief note in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. "Lissa. Sometimes nothing can be everything if you know where to look. This land was my beginning. Maybe it can be yours too. Love, Grandpa." I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my purse, unsure what to make of it. That evening, the family gathered at Rossini's, my grandfather's favorite restaurant, for what my mother called a celebration of Harold's life. In reality, it felt more like a celebration of Jason's windfall. "We can finally renovate the lake house," Brittany was saying as I took my seat. "That kitchen is straight out of the 80s. Your grandfather would be pleased to see the property staying in the family," my mother responded. "He loved that place." "What will you do with your inheritance, Melissa?" my Aunt Patricia asked, seemingly the only person who remembered I'd inherited anything at all. Before I could answer, Jason interjected. "Probably sell it to a farmer for a few grand. If she can find anyone interested in that scrubland. It's basically worthless, my father agreed. Your grandfather bought it for almost nothing back in the 60s. Strange that he kept it all these years. Maybe he forgot he owned it, my mother suggested, and several people laughed. I pushed my pasta around my plate, appetite gone. I thought I might go see it first, I said quietly. Jason raised his eyebrows. Don't waste your time. There's nothing there but weeds and probably snakes. The conversation moved on. My inheritance dismissed as insignificant, not worth further discussion. I sat through the rest of the dinner feeling increasingly invisible. A familiar sensation from childhood that I thought I'd left behind. That night in my old bedroom, I researched County Road 7 on my laptop. It was indeed rural, about 40 minutes from town. In an area that had once been primarily agricultural but now seemed to be a mix of farms and scattered residential properties. Satellite images showed mostly undeveloped land, though it was difficult to identify exactly which parcel was now mine. Despite my family's dismissal, or perhaps because of it, I decided to visit the property before returning to Minneapolis. Something about my grandfather's note suggested he'd left me this land for a reason, and I owed it to him to at least see it once. The following morning, I woke early and programmed the property's coordinates into my GPS. I told my mother I was meeting an old friend for breakfast, not wanting to hear more about my worthless inheritance. She barely looked up from her coffee, merely nodding in acknowledgement. County Road 7 was paved but narrow, winding through rolling countryside that was surprisingly pretty in the morning light. After several miles, my GPS indicated I was approaching my destination. I slowed, looking for markers or a mailbox, but there was nothing obvious to indicate which land was which. Finally, I spotted a rusty mailbox with the faded numbers 3529, the first 4 digits of the parcel number Mr. Freeman had read. I turned onto a gravel driveway nearly hidden by overgrown bushes, my rental car bouncing over ruts and potholes. The driveway extended about 100 yards before opening into a clearing. I parked and stepped out, immediately struck by the silence. No traffic noise, just birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the light breeze. At first glance, my family's assessment seemed accurate. The land was overgrown, with tall grasses and scattered brush dominating the visible area. A fallen tree lay across what might once have been a path. The property had clearly been neglected for years. I walked around aimlessly for a while, trying to understand why my grandfather would have kept this land all these years, only to be disappointed. There seemed to be nothing special about it, just undeveloped rural acreage with no distinguishing features I could see. As I was about to leave, I noticed something through a stand of trees, the corner of what looked like a structure. Curious, I pushed through the underbrush, snagging my jeans on thorns and swatting away insects. What I found stopped me in my tracks. Hidden from the driveway by trees and overgrowth was a small cabin. Its wooden exterior was weathered gray, the small porch sagging slightly, but the structure itself appeared sound. Windows were intact, shuttered against time and weather. I approached cautiously, stepping onto the porch, which creaked but held my weight. The door was secured with a padlock, but when I reached automatically for the top of the door frame, a hiding place my grandfather had always used for spare keys, my fingers found a small key taped exactly where I expected. The lock opened with a protesting screech, and I pushed the door open, coughing at the cloud of dust that greeted me. The interior was simple, one main room with a small kitchenette in one corner, a wood stove in another. A door presumably led to a bathroom, and a ladder-like staircase accessed a sleeping loft. Everything was covered in dust but otherwise untouched, as if waiting for someone to return. The cabin was sparsely furnished with hand-built wooden pieces that I immediately recognized as my grandfather's work. A table for chairs, a rocking chair by the wood stove, and shelves along one wall. On the shelves were books, tools, and mason jars filled with various hardware items, all meticulously labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Well, I'll be damned, I whispered to the empty room. This place had clearly meant something to my grandfather, had been created by him, yet no one in the family had ever mentioned it. On the table lay a leather-bound book. I opened it to find a journal, again in my grandfather's distinctive script. The first entry was dated June 1965. Asterisk, purchased the Wilkins property today. Martha thinks I'm crazy to buy worthless land, but I see what others don't. The creek running through the back acreage alone is worth the price. This will be my sanctuary. Asterisk. I spent the next hour reading entries that span decades. My grandfather had built the cabin himself over 2 summers, had planted trees now grown tall, had spent countless weekends here fishing in the creek I hadn't yet discovered. The journal detailed his love for this place, his plans for it, and increasingly in later entries, his hope that someday someone would appreciate it as he did. The last entry was dated just 3 months ago. Asterisk visited the cabin possibly for the last time today. Doctor says my heart won't hold out much longer. Cleaned everything up and left it ready. She'll understand what to do with it when the time comes. She's always seen what others miss. Asterisk. I closed the journal, eyes burning with tears I hadn't allowed myself at the funeral. This place had been his private joy, and he'd left it to me. Not because it was worthless but because he believed I would value it properly. As I stepped back outside, I noticed a truck slowing on the road. It pulled into the driveway and an older man emerged, looking curiously at my rental car. "Can I help you?" he called as he approached. Not unfriendly but cautious. "I'm Melissa Hayes," I responded. Harold Hayes was my grandfather. "This property is, well, it's mine now." His face transformed with a smile. "Well, I'll be. You're Harold's granddaughter. He talked about you all the time. I'm Frank Dawson, on the property that borders yours to the east. Harold and I have been neighbors for 40 years. Over the next hour, Frank shared stories about my grandfather that I'd never heard, how he'd helped build Frank's barn, how they'd fished together in the creek that apparently formed my property's back boundary, how my grandfather had fought the county when they wanted to run a power line through both their properties. "Your grandfather was smart as a whip about land," Frank said as we walked the overgrown path toward the creek I was eager to see. "Turned down offers for this place at least a dozen times over the years. Last one was a doozy too. Some developer willing to pay triple market value. Why would a developer want this land?" I asked, gesturing to the rural surroundings. "We're in the middle of nowhere." Frank laughed. "Not for long we're not. You haven't heard about Axion?" I shook my head. "Big tech company. Building their new headquarters about 15 minutes from here. Announced it last year. Land prices are already climbing, and once construction starts this fall, they'll skyrocket. Your 5 acres here, especially with the creek and road frontage, could be worth a small fortune soon." I stopped walking, processing this information. "My family thinks this land is worthless." Frank snorted. "No offense to your family, but your grandfather mentioned they never did see past the ends of their noses. Harold knew exactly what he was doing, keeping this place all these years. He was playing the long game." We reached the creek, which was wider and more beautiful than I'd imagined, running clear over smooth stones, bordered by mature trees that provided perfect shade. "This is incredible," I said, more to myself than to Frank. "Yep," he agreed. "Harold always said this spot alone was worth the price of the whole property. He used to bring you here when you were little. You don't remember?" I shook my head, but something about the sound of the water did seem familiar, like a half-forgotten dream. After Frank left, promising to stop by again before I returned to Minneapolis, I sat by the creek trying to absorb everything I'd learned. My worthless inheritance was potentially very valuable, but more than that, it was a place my grandfather had loved, had built with his own hands, had specifically chosen for me. On my drive back to town, I called Ashley Wilson, a friend from college who now worked in real estate development in Chicago. "I need some advice about a property," I explained, then detailed everything I'd learned. "First," she said when I finished, "get an official property survey done immediately. You need to know exactly what you own. Second, check zoning regulations if it's zoned agricultural. You'll want to look into rezoning options given the potential development. Third, don't tell anyone about the Axion connection if they don't already know. Land speculators will be all over you with lowball offers if word gets out you're interested in selling." "I'm not sure I want to sell," I said, surprising myself. Ashley was silent for a moment. "Well, that's a different conversation then. But still get the survey. And maybe talk to an architect about the cabin's potential. If it's structurally sound, renovation might be more affordable than you think." By the time I returned to my parents' house, my mind was buzzing with possibilities. For the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt a spark of excitement. "Where have you been all day?" my mother asked when I walked in, though her tone suggested minimal actual interest. "Just catching up with old friends," I said, deciding to keep my discoveries to myself for now. Some instinct told me to play my cards close until I knew exactly what I wanted to do. That night, I extended my return flight by 2 weeks and booked a local hotel. Whatever was happening with this property, I needed time to figure it out properly. And somehow I didn't think my family would understand. Hashtag part 5, building something from nothing. 6 months later, I stood on my newly rebuilt porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise over my land. The transformation was remarkable even to me who had witnessed every step of the process. After that first visit, I'd taken a leave of absence from my job in Minneapolis. Initially for a month but eventually extending to a permanent remote work arrangement. My boss had been surprisingly supportive once I explained my situation, allowing me to handle marketing projects from Michigan as long as I maintained regular video meetings with clients. The first challenge had been making the cabin habitable. A local contractor, Mike Thornton, had inspected it and pronounced the structure solid as a rock. "Your grandfather knew what he was doing," he said, echoing what was becoming a common refrain. "The foundation is perfect, roof's in good shape. It's mostly cosmetic work and updating the systems." I hired Mike to handle the electrical and plumbing renovations, while I tackled the interior cleaning and restoration myself. Every weekend became a work session, stripping years of dust and grime, repairing what was broken, and slowly bringing my grandfather's vision back to life. Word spread quickly in the small community that Harold Hayes's granddaughter was fixing up his old cabin. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles, offers of help, and stories about my grandfather. Through their tales, I discovered a side of him I'd never known. The respected community member, the skilled craftsman, the man who quietly helped others without seeking recognition. Rachel Carson, a young woman who owned the organic farm down the road, became a regular weekend helper and fast friend. Despite being 10 years younger than me, she possessed practical knowledge that proved invaluable. "If you're serious about staying, you should plant fruit trees along the western boundary," she advised one Saturday as we painted the cabin's interior. "They'll produce in about 3 years and provide a windbreak in the meantime." I took her advice, investing in apple, pear, and cherry saplings, planting them with a sense of commitment to the future that surprised me. Each tree represented years of waiting, a timeline that suggested I wasn't just passing through. The creek became my thinking spot, where I'd retreat with difficult decisions or just to enjoy the peace. I built a simple bench from fallen timber, using tools I found in my grandfather's workshop and skills I'd learned from him long ago. As summer turned to fall, the property revealed new aspects of itself: wild blackberry bushes heavy with fruit, a grove of sugar maples perfect for tapping, and wildlife that grew increasingly comfortable with my presence. I spotted deer at dawn, foxes at dusk, and once, a majestic great horned owl perched on the cabin's ridge. October brought confirmation of what Frank had first told me. Axion Technology broke ground on their new headquarters just 11 miles from my property. Local news covered the event extensively, emphasizing the expected economic boost to the region. Land values, already rising in anticipation, jumped significantly overnight. The first offer to buy my property came 3 days later, a development company proposing to build luxury homes for incoming tech executives. The figure they suggested was so far beyond what I'd imagined that I actually laughed when I read it. "You're sitting on a gold mine," Rachel said when I showed her the letter. "What are you going to do?" I gazed around at the land I'd spent months restoring, at the cabin that now felt like home, at the saplings that wouldn't bear fruit for years. "I'm not sure selling is the right move," I said slowly. "This place is becoming part of me." Rachel nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Your grandfather would be proud." As winter approached, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would build a proper house on the property while maintaining the cabin as a guest house or studio. The money I'd saved over years of frugal living would cover the initial costs, and with property values rising, a construction loan would be easily secured. I hired an architect specializing in sustainable design, explaining my vision for a home that would blend with the landscape rather than dominate it. Together we created plans for a modern yet timeless structure that would utilize passive solar heating, incorporate reclaimed materials where possible, and maintain the creek views that had become essential to my well-being. Breaking ground in November wasn't ideal in Michigan, but we managed the foundation work before the first heavy snow. Throughout the winter, I continued improvements on the cabin while finalizing plans for spring construction. During those cold months, I learned new skills from Mike and his crew: basic carpentry, tiling, even some electrical work. There was something deeply satisfying about physical labor after years of office work, about seeing tangible results at the end of each day. "You're a natural," Mike commented as I installed cabinet hardware with precision. "Must run in the family." The winter also brought challenges: pipes freezing during a particularly cold spell, a tree falling across my driveway during an ice storm, and the isolation that came with rural living. Yet each problem solved strengthened my connection to the place, making it truly mine in ways a simple inheritance couldn't. By March, with snow melting and construction about to resume, word of my property's transformation had apparently reached my family. After months of minimal contact, just holiday texts and a brief Christmas call, my phone suddenly displayed my brother's name. "Jason," I answered, surprised. "Everything okay?" "Hey sis," he replied with forced casualness. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in ages. Mom mentioned you were spending time at Grandpa's property. How's that going?" Something in his tone made me cautious. "It's going well. Just fixing the place up a bit." "Yeah. Heard there's some development happening out that way. Axion or something." And there it was, the real reason for his call. "There's some construction in the area," I acknowledged vaguely. "Smart of you to hang on to that land," he continued. "Probably worth something now, huh? Thinking of selling?" I looked out my window at the foundation of my future home, at the land I'd spent 6 months restoring. "Not currently," I replied. "Well, if you change your mind, let me know first," Jason said. "I might know some interested parties." "I bet you do," I thought but didn't say. After Jason's call came others. My mother suddenly interested in my little project. My father suggesting he drive out to give some advice. Even Brittany sent a text saying they should catch up soon. Their sudden interest would have gratified my younger self, so desperate for family attention. Now, I recognized it for what it was: not concern for me, but interest in what I had. As spring fully arrived, construction on the house proceeded rapidly. I opted for an open-concept design that maximized natural light and creek views, with sustainable features throughout. Local materials were used wherever possible, including stone from a nearby quarry for the fireplace and maple from a responsible logging operation for the floors. Each decision, from window placement to door handles, felt significant. I was building not just a house but a future. Sometimes at dusk, I'd sit on a stack of lumber and watch the day's progress, marveling at how my worthless inheritance was transforming into something beautiful. "Your grandfather used to do the same thing," Frank commented one evening, joining me in my observation. "Just sit and look at his land like he was memorizing every inch." "I never understood him the way I do now," I admitted. "Why didn't he ever bring the family here? Why keep this place secret?" Frank considered this, chewing thoughtfully on a toothpick. "Harold was a private man. And forgive me for saying so, but from what he told me, your family wasn't much for appreciating what couldn't be shown off." I couldn't argue with that assessment. By early summer, the house was taking its final shape. The exterior was complete, a harmonious blend of wood, stone, and glass that seemed to belong to the landscape. Interior work progressed steadily, with my evenings and weekends dedicated to tasks I could handle myself: painting, light fixture installation, cabinet assembly. Rachel brought me a housewarming gift before the house was even finished: raspberry bushes from her farm to plant along the sunny eastern edge of my clearing. "For future jam," she explained as we dug holes for the transplants. "Every home needs its own jam supply." It was such a small thing, but it nearly brought me to tears, this assumption of permanence, of seasons and years to come in this place that had become mine in every sense that mattered. The following weekend, as Mike and I discussed final details for the kitchen installation, a sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. Jason stepped out, followed by Brittany, both looking oddly out of place in designer casual wear against the backdrop of construction materials in rural landscape. "Wow," Jason said, approaching with exaggerated amazement. "You've been busy." I introduced them to Mike, who excused himself tactfully, sensing family dynamics at play. "This is unexpected," Brittany commented, gesturing at the nearly completed house. "When Jason said you were fixing up the property, I pictured, I don't know, a garden or something." "It started small," I acknowledged. "Things evolved." Jason walked around, assessing everything with calculating eyes. "Must be costing a fortune. How are you affording all this?" The question was typical Jason, direct about money in ways most people avoided, always assuming financial discussions were appropriate. I've been saving for years, I said simply. And property values here support the investment. No kidding, he replied with a short laugh. Do you have any idea what this land is worth now with the Axion development? You're sitting on a fortune, Mel. I'm aware, I said, keeping my tone neutral. And you're building a house instead of cashing in? That's... He trailed off, clearly finding my decision incomprehensible. Smart, I finished for him. This is exactly what I want. Brittany wandered toward the creek, her impractical shoes sinking slightly in the soft ground. It is pretty, she conceded. I can see this as a nice weekend place. I live here, I corrected. I've arranged to work remotely permanently. Jason's expression shifted, something like concern replacing his assessment. You're living here? In the middle of nowhere? What about your career? My career is fine, I assured him. Better, actually. The change of pace has been good for my creativity. He shook his head slightly as if unable to process my choices. Look, can we talk business for a minute? That's partly why we came. And there it was, the real purpose of their visit. I'm listening, I said. I've been thinking about Grandpa's legacy, he began. His sales pitch voice emerging. How we might honor his memory while also making smart financial decisions. I waited, already anticipating what was coming. My investment business has some exciting opportunities right now. With the capital this property could generate, we could create something really significant. A Hayes family investment fund. Maybe even a foundation in Grandpa's name. You want me to sell my land and give you the money to invest? I translated. Jason looked affronted. That's oversimplifying. I'm talking about pooling family resources for mutual benefit. Mom and Dad think it's a great idea. Of course they did. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully. But I'm happy with my current plan. Jason's expression hardened slightly. Don't be hasty, Mel. You're not a real estate developer or an investment professional. You could make serious mistakes trying to manage this on your own. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Jason growing increasingly frustrated by my refusal to consider his proposal. When they finally left, the tension was palpable, his parting words heavy with implication. Think about it, Melissa. Families should stick together on these things. I'll call you next week. After their dust had settled, I sat by the creek, trying to recapture the peace their visit had disrupted. It wasn't just Jason's presumption that bothered me, it was the realization that despite everything I'd built here, my family still saw me as incapable of managing my own affairs. Still viewed me as the lesser sibling who should defer to Jason's judgment. Some patterns, it seemed, were difficult to break. But as I looked at my nearly completed home, at the land transformed by my vision and hard work, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't the same person who had stood in that lawyer's office 6 months ago, accepting what others defined as nothing. This time I would define my own worth. As summer progressed, my house neared completion. The kitchen with its handcrafted maple cabinets and soapstone counters became the heart of the space. Large windows brought the outdoors in, framing views that changed with the light and seasons. Solar panels on the south-facing roof provided most of my electricity needs, while a highly efficient wood stove would supplement the heating system in winter. I'd just finished installing the last of the bathroom fixtures when my phone rang with my mother's ringtone, the third call this week after months of near silence. Melissa. She began without preamble. Your father and I are concerned about this isolation you've chosen. It's not healthy for a single woman to live so far from family. I bit back a laugh at her sudden concern for my well-being. I'm not isolated, Mom. I have friends here, a supportive community. And Minneapolis was much farther from family than this property is. That was different, she dismissed. You were building a career then. Jason tells us you've sunk all your savings into this project. It's not a project, it's my home, I corrected. And my financial decisions are mine to make. She sighed dramatically. We're worried you're making emotional choices because of your grandfather. This attachment to a piece of land he left you. A piece of land you all called worthless. I interrupted, unable to maintain patience. Funny how everyone's so interested now that it has monetary value. That's unfair, she protested. We're thinking about what's best for you. The conversation continued in circles until I pleaded a work deadline to end it. No sooner had I hung up than a text from Aunt Patricia arrived. Asterisk heard about your property's value from Diana. Smart girl holding on to it. If you need investment advice, your uncle knows a great financial advisor. Asterisk. The next day brought an email from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Suddenly interested in reconnecting and mentioning they'd be in the area soon. Then came a voicemail from my father suggesting he had contacts in real estate development who could advise me. The pattern was clear. Word of my property's value had spread through the family grapevine, and suddenly everyone had opinions about what I should do with it. None of these communications expressed interest in what I wanted or had accomplished, only in the potential value I controlled. Then came the visit I'd been half expecting. My parents' car pulled into my driveway unannounced on a Saturday morning as I was painting trim around my front door. Surprise, my mother called with false brightness as they emerged. We thought we'd come see this place we've heard so much about. My father surveyed the house and land with the appraising he'd always turned on potential investments. You've done more than we expected, he acknowledged, which from him was nearly praise. I gave them a tour. Watching their expressions shift from skepticism to surprise to calculation as they took in the quality of the construction, the thoughtful design, the beauty of the setting. It's lovely, my mother admitted as we stood on the back deck overlooking the creek. But rather more rustic than I'd choose. It suits me, I said simply. What's your long-term plan for the property? My father asked, his banker's instincts emerging. The house occupies what, an acre? You still have 4 acres with development potential. I'm keeping it as is, I replied. The undeveloped land is part of what makes this place special. He frowned slightly. That's leaving a lot of value untapped. Value isn't always financial, Dad. His expression suggested this concept was foreign to him. Over lunch at my newly installed dining table, the conversation inevitably turned to Jason. My mother mentioned casually that his investment business was facing some challenges, but quickly pivoted to his children's achievements in school sports. Jason mentioned he spoke to you about some business ideas, my father said, attempting nonchalance. He did, I confirmed without elaboration. Your brother has a good head for business. He continued. Always has. He sees opportunities others miss. I thought of my grandfather's journal entry. She's always seen what others miss. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jason's proposal has merit, my father pressed when I remained silent. Pooling family resources is smart planning. It would be, I agreed, if that's what he was actually proposing. But we both know Jason wants control of my asset, not a genuine partnership. That's not fair, Melissa, my mother interjected. Your brother is thinking of the family's best interests. Is he? I challenged. Or his own. An uncomfortable silence fell. My father broke it with uncharacteristic directness. Jason's business is in trouble, he admitted. Some investments didn't pan out as expected. He needs capital to stabilize things. And you want me to provide that capital by selling my land, I concluded. We want you to help your brother. My mother corrected. Family helps family, Melissa. You know that. I looked at them both, these parents who had always prioritized Jason's needs, who had dismissed my inheritance as worthless until it proved valuable, who now expected me to sacrifice my dreams to rescue my brother from his mistakes. I'm sorry Jason's business is struggling, I said carefully, but this is my home, not an ATM for family emergencies. It's just land, my mother said, frustration evident. You could build another house somewhere else. It's not just land, I countered. It's everything I've built here, everything I've planned. It's the future I've chosen. Sometimes we have to set aside personal preferences for family obligations, my father stated, his tone suggesting the matter should be settled. Funny, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I don't recall that principle being applied when Jason got everything and I got nothing. They left shortly after, the visit ending with strained politeness masking mutual disappointment. As their car disappeared down my driveway, I felt an odd mixture of sadness and relief, sad that even now, they couldn't see me clearly, but relieved to have stood my ground. 2 days later, Jason called again. Mom and Dad visited your place, he began. They did, I confirmed. They were impressed, he admitted grudgingly. Listen, Mel. I think we got off on the wrong foot with my proposal. Let me come out again, just to talk. No pressure. Something in his voice, a note of desperation perhaps, made me agree. We arranged for him to visit the following weekend, alone this time. When he arrived, I was surprised by his appearance. The confident, slightly arrogant brother I'd known looked tired. The designer clothes from his previous visit replaced by more casual attire, his usual swagger subdued. We walked the property perimeter, conversation staying on safe topics, the house construction. The fruit trees beginning to establish themselves, the family of otters I'd spotted in the creek. It was the longest we talked without tension in years. As we circled back toward the house, Jason finally broached the real purpose of his visit. "I'm in trouble, Mel," he said bluntly. "Serious trouble." I waited, sensing there was more to this than my parents had revealed. "The business is failing," he continued. "Not just struggling, failing. I made some high-risk investments that went bad, took on too much debt trying to recover. Now I've got creditors breathing down my neck, and not enough liquid assets to satisfy them." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite our complicated relationship, I took no pleasure in his distress. "That's not all," he added, his voice dropping. "I used the lake house as collateral for a business loan. If I default, we lose Grandpa's vacation property." I stopped walking. "Does Mom know?" "No," he admitted. "They know things are tight, but not how bad it really is. I've been keeping up appearances. The Hayes family specialty." "What does this have to do with my property?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. Jason ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "Your land. With the Axion development driving up values, it could save everything. If you sold, even just the undeveloped portions, it would be enough to clear my debts and keep the business afloat until the market turns around." "And if I don't?" His expression hardened slightly. "Then I lose everything, the business. The lake house, possibly even my personal assets. Bankruptcy is a real possibility, Mel." I absorbed this, trying to separate genuine sympathy from the manipulation I sensed beneath his disclosure. "That's a terrible position to be in," I acknowledged. "But Jason, this is my home. My future. Why should I sacrifice that to fix your mistakes?" "Because that's what family does," he insisted, echoing our parents. "And let's be honest, this was just luck on your part. You didn't earn this windfall. Grandpa gave it to you. Just like he gave you the lake house and $500,000 in assets," I pointed out. "The difference is what we did with our inheritances. I built something. You leveraged yours for risky investments." His face flushed. "That's not fair. I was trying to grow the family legacy." "No," I disagreed. "You were trying to prove something. And now you want me to give up what I've built to save your pride." "It's not about pride," he snapped. "It's about responsibility. I have a family to support, a reputation in the community. Dad and Mom have their retirement partially tied to my business success. It's not just me who suffers if I fail." And there it was, the core of our family dynamic. Jason's needs, Jason's success, Jason's failures, all were family priorities. Mine were personal indulgences. "I need time to think about this," I said finally, unwilling to make a decision under pressure. He nodded, visibly relieved that I hadn't immediately refused. As he was leaving, he turned back with one final comment. "I've already promised some of my creditors that the property sale is coming through," he admitted. "So I need your decision soon." I stared at him, incredulous. "You promised them my property?" Without even speaking to me first. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I was confident you'd help once you understood the situation." After he left, I sat by the creek for hours, trying to sort through my conflicting feelings. Sympathy for Jason's predicament warred with anger at his presumption. Family loyalty battled with self-preservation. That night, I called Rachel, needing an outside perspective. "Let me get this straight," she said after I explained the situation. "Your brother, who's always been favored, squandered his substantial inheritance on bad investments, and now expects you to give up what you've built to bail him out." "That's the short version," I confirmed. "And what happens to you if you do this? Sell the land you love, the home you've created?" I've been asking myself the same question. Best case? I'd have enough left after paying his debts to buy something smaller, further from town. Start over somewhere else. And worst case? His debts are bigger than he's admitting. The money disappears into the black hole of his business, and I lose everything for nothing. Rachel was silent for a moment. "Can I ask you something personal? Do you think they'd do the same for you?" If situations were reversed, would your brother sell his lake house to save you from financial ruin? The answer came instantly, with a certainty that was both painful and clarifying. No, I said. He wouldn't. 3 days after Jason's visit, my mother called to invite me to dinner at their house. A family discussion about the future, she called it. Though tempted to refuse, I agreed. Knowing avoidance would only delay the inevitable confrontation. The family home looked exactly as it always had, perfectly maintained, tastefully decorated, emotionally sterile. As I pulled into the driveway, I noted Jason's car already parked in his usual spot. Brittany's absence suggested this was intended as immediate family only, which heightened my suspicion about the evening's agenda. My mother greeted me with air kisses near my cheeks, ushering me into the dining room where the table was set with the good china, a clear indicator of the occasion's importance in her mind. My father and Jason were already seated, their conversation pausing as I entered. Melissa, my father nodded. Good to see you. Jason attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The tension in the room was palpable. Dinner proceeded with forced pleasantries, discussions of weather, distant relatives, and community news, all carefully avoiding the real purpose of our gathering. Only when my mother served coffee and her signature cheesecake did my father clear his throat, signaling the transition to business. We need to discuss a family matter, he began formally. As you know, Jason's business has encountered some challenges. Jason stared into his coffee cup while my father outlined the situation in banker's terms. Liquidity issues, market fluctuations, temporary cash flow problems. All euphemisms for what I now understood was impending financial collapse. After careful consideration, my father continued, we believe we've found a solution that works for everyone. My mother nodded encouragingly, as if this were a collaborative process rather than what I suspected was coming, a predetermined plan I was expected to accept. We think the most sensible approach is for you to sell your property. Melissa, my father stated. The proceeds would allow Jason to resolve his immediate financial concerns, while setting aside a portion for your future needs. My future needs are that property. I pointed out. It's my home. Temporarily, my mother interjected. You could move back to Minneapolis, resume your career path there. Or even stay locally, the market for smaller properties is quite reasonable. And who would decide how much of my property's value I get to keep? I asked, already knowing the answer. Jason would manage the funds, my father confirmed. He knows how to maximize investment returns despite the current setback. I looked at my brother, who finally met my eyes. You want me to sell my land, give you the money, and trust you to handle it appropriately? After you've just admitted to mismanaging your own business to the point of collapse. That's not fair. My mother protested. Jason has years of investment experience. And where has that experience gotten him? I challenged. Everyone faces setbacks, my father defended. The mark of a successful businessman is how they recover. With other people's money, apparently, I observed. Jason finally spoke. Look, I know this isn't ideal from your perspective. But we're talking about a temporary sacrifice for the good of the family. I'll repay everything once the business recovers. If it recovers, I correct it. When it recovers, he insisted. I've already lined up new investors contingent on clearing the existing debt. This is a short-term solution to a temporary problem. I studied him, trying to determine if he actually believed this or was simply desperate. Why is this my responsibility to fix? You received far more from Grandpa than I did. The lake house alone could cover your debts. The lake house is family legacy, my mother interjected. It's been in the family for generations. Your grandfather would never want it sold. But my land, also from Grandpa, that's dispensable? It's different, my father insisted. The lake house has family history. Your property was just an investment your grandfather made decades ago. I thought of the cabin my grandfather built with his own hands, the journal documenting years of his life spent on that land. The careful stewardship he'd maintained for decades. They knew nothing of that history because they'd never bothered to look beyond their assumptions. There's something you should know, Jason said, his voice dropping. I've already used the lake house as collateral. If I default, we lose it anyway. My parents' shocked expressions confirmed they hadn't known this detail. You did what? My father demanded. I had no choice, Jason defended. The business needed capital and it was the only asset valuable enough to secure the necessary loan. So you're asking me to sell my property not just to save your business, but to save the lake house you recklessly leveraged? I clarified, anger rising despite my efforts to remain calm. I'm asking you to help family, Jason countered. Something you seem reluctant to do. Jason, my mother cautioned, sensing the conversation spiraling. But he continued. Frustration overwhelming restraint. Let's be honest here. You've always resented that Grandpa left me the lion's share of his estate. This is your chance to prove you're not bitter about it. I'm not bitter about the distribution, I replied evenly. I'm bitter about the assumptions behind it, the same assumptions happening right now. That Jason's needs automatically outweigh mine. That his mistakes must be fixed at my expense. That his path matters more than mine. That's not true, my mother protested weakly. Isn't it? I challenged. When have my achievements ever been celebrated like Jason's? When has my happiness been a family priority? An uncomfortable silence fell, broken finally by my father. Regardless of past family dynamics, he said dismissively, the current situation requires practical solutions. Jason needs capital quickly to satisfy creditors. Your property can provide that capital. The family needs to stand together. The truth is, Jason added, dropping all pretense, I've already promised some of my largest creditors that the property sale is imminent. They've granted extensions based on that assurance. You had no right to do that, I said, my voice hardening. I did what was necessary, he countered. And as firstborn son, I have certain responsibilities to maintain the family's financial stability and reputation. I nearly laughed at the archaic justification. Firstborn son? Is this the 19th century? Family tradition matters, my mother interjected. Your brother has carried the Hayes name in business circles for years. His success reflects on all of us. And my success doesn't? I asked. Your little house project is hardly comparable to Jason's business enterprises, my father dismissed. My little house project is profitable and debt-free, I pointed out. Which is more than Jason can say for his enterprises. The conversation deteriorated further, with Jason growing increasingly frustrated by my refusal to accept their solution. My parents alternating between appeals to family loyalty and thinly veiled guilt tactics. I think we need to be clear about what's happening here, I finally said. Interrupting their latest round of persuasion. You're asking me to give up my home, my plans, and my financial security to fix Jason's mistakes. Not because it's fair or right, but because in this family, his needs have always come first. That's a very selfish perspective, my mother said, disappointment evident in her tone. Is it selfish to want to keep what's mine? To protect what I've built? I asked. Or is it selfish to expect someone else to sacrifice their dreams to fix your mistakes? Enough, my father said sharply. This isn't productive. Melissa, you need to think about this reasonably. Family stands together in crisis. Your brother would do the same for you. The statement was so patently false that even Jason looked away. Unable to maintain the pretense. Would he? I challenged. If I needed financial help, would Jason sell his assets to help me? No one answered. I thought so, I said quietly. My father's expression hardened. I see you've made your decision. But understand the consequences. If you refuse to help your brother now in his time of genuine need, you're effectively turning your back on this family. That sounds like an ultimatum, I observed. Take it however you want, he replied. But family loyalty goes both ways. I stood, suddenly tired of the circular conversation. I need time to think. This isn't a small decision. Don't take too long, Jason warned. My creditors won't wait forever. Neither will I replied, gathering my purse and heading for the door. My mother followed me to the entryway. Melissa, please. Your father may have expressed it poorly, but we're desperate. Jason could lose everything. I turned to face her. And what about what I could lose? It's just a house, she said dismissively. You can build another one. Her words crystallized everything wrong with our family dynamic. My dreams, my work, my future, all were just something. Disposable. Secondary. Goodbye, Mom, I said quietly and walked out the door. During the drive back to my property, emotions warred within me. Anger at their presumption, hurt at their dismissal of my life, guilt at the thought of Jason's financial ruin, and beneath it all, a deep sadness for the family relationship I'd always hoped for but never truly had. I parked in front of my nearly completed house, its windows dark and welcoming in the evening light. The house I'd designed, that I'd helped build, that represented not just shelter but a vision for my future. Could I really give it up? Unable to face the empty rooms, I walked instead to my grandfather's cabin, now restored to its simple beauty. Inside, I lit the wood stove against the evening chill and sat in the rocking chair he'd built decades ago. My gaze fell on his journal, still kept on the small table where I'd found it. I picked it up, opening to random pages, finding comfort in his handwriting, his thoughts, his vision for this place that had become my sanctuary. Near the back, I discovered several pages I hadn't noticed before, dated just weeks before his death, tucked into a pocket in the binding. With trembling hands, I unfolded them and began to read. My dear Lissa. If you're reading this, you've discovered what I always hoped you would, that this land is far more than it appears. Just as you are, I've watched you all your life, seen your strength when others only saw compliance, your vision when others saw practicality, your worth when others, even those who should have valued you most, failed to see your true potential. I divided my estate as I did with purpose. Jason received what he values: status, ready wealth, tangible assets. You received what would nurture your spirit, possibility, challenge, a blank canvas. I knew you would either sell this land quickly and use the modest proceeds to further your independence, or you would see its potential and create something remarkable. Either choice would be right if it was truly yours. But if you've kept this land, if you've built something here as I suspect you might, then you've already received the true inheritance I hope to give you. Not just property, but proof of your own capability, your vision, your strength. Whatever you decide to do with this gift, remember that it is yours. Not the family's, not your brother's, not a resource to be claimed by others who suddenly see its value. I gave it to you because I saw your value long before this land had any. Trust yourself, Lissa. You see what others miss. With pride and love. Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Even from beyond the grave, my grandfather had anticipated the family dynamics, had provided not just land but the validation I'd always craved. In that moment, my decision crystallized. This land, this home, this future, they were mine. Not just legally but morally, emotionally. I would not give them up to satisfy obligations created by others, to fix mistakes I hadn't made, to maintain a family harmony that had always come at my expense. The realization brought not just clarity but a strange peace. For perhaps the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I stood and what I wanted. Whatever came next, family estrangement, Jason's financial collapse, my parents' disappointment, I would face it knowing I had honored not just my grandfather's gift, but my own worth. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and hard boundaries. But tonight, in the cabin my grandfather built, surrounded by the land he'd entrusted to me, I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach me all along. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what others think has worth, but the courage to recognize your own. The morning after the family dinner, I woke early in my grandfather's cabin, his journal still open beside me. The clarity I'd felt the night before remained, strengthened by rest and reinforced by the morning light filtering through the windows he'd built decades ago. I spent the day alone on my property, walking its boundaries, sitting by the creek, and finally touring my nearly completed house, not as a building project but as the home it would soon become. Each space represented a choice I'd made, a vision of my future, a testament to what I'd created from what my family had dismissed as nothing. By evening, I'd made my decision, not from anger or hurt, but from a place of calm certainty that this was my path to follow. I called my parents first, asking to meet them the following day, neutral ground, a coffee shop in town. They arrived precisely on time, as always. My mother looked tense, my father impassive. I'd arrived early to secure a quiet corner table that would afford some privacy for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. I've made my decision, I began after minimal pleasantries, not wanting to prolong the inevitable. I'm not selling my property. My father's expression hardened immediately. I see you've chosen selfishness over family loyalty. No, I counter calmly. I've chosen my future over Jason's mistakes. Those aren't the same thing. Your brother is facing financial ruin, my mother said, her voice low but intense. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Of course it does, I acknowledged. I don't want Jason to fail. But I also don't want to sacrifice everything I've built to prevent consequences he created through his own choices. Family helps family, my father insisted, repeating what had become their mantra. I agree, I said. Which is why I have a counterproposal. They exchanged glances, clearly not having expected this. I won't sell my property, but I do own 5 acres. The house and cabin occupy less than 1 acre. I'm willing to sell 1 acre of the undeveloped land to help Jason address his immediate crisis. 1 acre won't generate nearly enough, my father dismissed. It would generate approximately $200,000 at current market rates, I said, having done my research. Enough to provide breathing room while Jason restructures his debt. That's just postponing the inevitable, my father argued. Jason needs comprehensive refinancing. Then perhaps he should consider other options, I suggested. Selling the lake house, for instance. Out of the question, my mother interjected. That property is family legacy. So is my land, I pointed out. Just because you didn't value it doesn't make it less significant. This isn't what we discussed, my father said, frustration evident. Jason has already made arrangements based on the full property sale. That was premature, I replied. I never agreed to sell. So you'll let your brother face bankruptcy? My mother asked, her tone suggesting this was equivalent to abandoning him in a life-threatening situation. That's not my decision, I said carefully. Jason created this situation. He has options, selling his own assets, negotiating with creditors, even bankruptcy if necessary. All would be difficult. But they're his choices to make, not mine to prevent at all costs. I never thought you could be so cold, my mother said, tears welling. Your own brother. I took a deep breath, maintaining my resolve despite her emotional appeal. I'm not being cold. I'm being clear about boundaries I should have established long ago. My offer to sell 1 acre stands. Beyond that, I can't help. My father studied me for a moment, perhaps seeing for the first time that I wouldn't be swayed by the usual family pressure tactics. You understand what this means, he said finally. If you turn your back on your brother now, there will be consequences for your relationship with this family. Are you suggesting you'll cut me off if I don't comply? I asked directly. He didn't deny it. Family loyalty goes both ways, Melissa. I nodded, a profound sadness settling over me despite my certainty. Then I need to be clear about something. If helping family means I must sacrifice my home, my security, and my future, then that's not loyalty, it's exploitation. And I won't participate in it anymore. I stood, gathering my purse. My offer of 1 acre stands until the end of the month. After that, I'll move forward with my own plans for the property. I left them sitting there, my mother dabbing at tears. My father stone-faced. The weight of their disappointment followed me out the door, but it felt lighter than it once would have, no longer the crushing burden I'd carried for years. Jason was next. I called rather than meeting in person, sensing a face-to-face conversation would only escalate emotions. 1 acre, he repeated after I'd explained my offer. That's not even close to what I need. Mel, it's what I'm willing to provide, I said firmly. The rest is up to you. You know this means I'll probably lose everything, he said, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. The business, the lake house, maybe even my home. I know it means you face difficult choices, I acknowledged. But they're your choices to make, not mine to prevent. After everything I've done for you, he began. What exactly have you done for me, Jason? I interrupted, genuine curiosity in my question. When have you ever sacrificed anything significant for my benefit? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said quietly. So this is revenge, he concluded bitterly. For all the times you thought you were overlooked. No, I corrected. This is me recognizing my own worth. Something I should have done long ago. After we hung up, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over my land. The conversation had been painful but necessary, establishing boundaries that should have existed all along. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as I completed the move into my new house. The final touches came together, landscaping around the foundation, interior paint. The installation of handcrafted light fixtures I'd commissioned from a local artisan. Each element reflected my vision, my choices, my future taking tangible form. Jason never accepted my offer of 1 acre. Instead, as I later learned through community gossip, He liquidated his investment portfolio at a loss and sold his family's vacation home in a private sale to meet his most pressing obligations. The business survived, though significantly downsized. His public story became one of strategic restructuring rather than near bankruptcy. My parents maintained a chilly distance, our communication reduced to occasional text messages and holiday cards. The threatened complete estrangement never quite materialized. Perhaps they couldn't bring themselves to follow through, or perhaps they recognized, even if they wouldn't admit it, that their ultimatum had been unjust. 6 months after moving into my completed home, I made a decision about the remaining 4 acres of my property. Rather than keeping it all or selling to developers, I worked with a land conservation trust to place 3 acres into a permanent conservation easement, ensuring the creek and surrounding woodland would remain undeveloped regardless of future ownership. The tax benefits were substantial, but more importantly, it felt like honoring my grandfather's stewardship of the land, with a portion of the proceeds from selling the 1 remaining developable acre. I established a small scholarship fund at the local community college for students pursuing training in traditional crafts and building trades. I named it the Harold Hayes Memorial Scholarship, with preference given to students demonstrating the ability to see potential where others see nothing, a tribute to my grandfather's wisdom. Rachel's raspberry bushes flourished along the eastern edge of my clearing, producing their first small harvest that summer. As we made jam in my kitchen, my first ever attempt, she asked the question that had been implicit in many of our conversations. Do you regret standing your ground? With your family, I mean. I considered this as I stirred the bubbling berries. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. I regret that they couldn't see my perspective or respect my choices. But no, I don't regret maintaining my boundaries. Even with the family fallout, I looked out the window at the home I'd created, at the land that had transformed from nothing to the center of my life. Some prices are worth paying for self-respect, I answered. And sometimes what seems like losing family approval, in my case, is actually gaining something more valuable. Like what? She prompted. Like discovering your own strength. Like building something that truly reflects your values. Like realizing you can stand alone and still be okay. I filled the first jar with still hot jam, securing the lid with satisfaction. My grandfather left me land that everyone thought was worthless. But he knew, and now I know, that value isn't always obvious at first glance. Sometimes it has to be recognized, nurtured, developed through your own efforts. And sometimes I continued. Looking at the row of jars waiting to be filled, the greatest gifts come disguised as nothing. The inheritance that truly mattered wasn't the land itself, but what creating something from it taught me about my own capabilities. A year after the family confrontation, my house was featured in a regional architecture magazine highlighting sustainable design. I sent copies to my parents and Jason, not as a boast but as an olive branch, a way of showing them what I'd created, hoping they might finally understand what this place meant to me. Jason called a few days later, his tone more subdued than I'd ever heard it. Your house is beautiful, he said without preamble. Really impressive, Mel. Thank you, I replied, surprised by the genuine compliment. I've been thinking about everything that happened, he continued. I was wrong to expect you to sacrifice your dreams for my mistakes. It took me a while to see that. The admission stunned me into momentary silence. Are you still there? He asked. Yes, I managed. Just surprised. Near bankruptcy gives you perspective, he said with a hollow laugh. Anyway, I wanted you to know I get it now. Why you couldn't give up your land. I wouldn't have given up the lake house either if I'd had any choice. But you did have a choice. I pointed out gently. Just not ones you wanted to face. Fair enough, he conceded. Look, I'm not asking for forgiveness or anything. Just wanted to acknowledge that I see things differently now. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start, the first genuine conversation we'd had in years. Without the family dynamics that had always defined our relationship, my parents took longer to come around. My father called after the magazine feature. His comments limited to technical questions about the solar system and construction materials. My mother eventually visited 6 months later. Her approval tentative but present as she toured the completed home. It's not what I would have chosen, she admitted, running her hand along the custom kitchen island. But it suits you somehow. From her, this was significant progress. As I approached the second anniversary of my grandfather's passing, I often think about how different my life would be if I'd followed the path my family expected. If I'd sold this worthless inheritance and used the proceeds to rescue Jason from his financial mistakes, I would have lost not just property but possibility. Not just a house but a home that reflects my true self. Not just land but the lessons it taught me about recognizing my own worth. Sometimes I sit in my grandfather's restored cabin, reading his journal entries from decades past, finding new connections between his experiences and mine. He too had faced family pressure to conform, to prioritize others' definitions of success, to surrender his vision for this land. In quietly maintaining his course, he provided not just an inheritance but a blueprint for living authentically. The other day, I found a young woman hiking along the public trail that now runs along the creek as part of the conservation easement. She was photographing wildflowers, completely absorbed in capturing their detail. "They're so easy to miss," she explained when she noticed me watching. "These tiny flowers that most people walk right past. But when you really look at them, they're beautiful." I finished for her. "Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones others overlook." She nodded, understanding perfectly, and returned to her photography. Walking back to my house, I smiled at how my grandfather's wisdom continues to ripple outward. From a piece of nothing has come something of true value, not just a home or property, but a life aligned with my authentic self. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had your dreams dismissed as impractical or unimportant, if you've ever stood at a crossroads between pleasing others and honoring yourself, I hope my story reminds you to trust your vision. The most meaningful inheritance isn't what others think has value, but the courage to recognize your own worth. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? Or discovered value in something others overlooked? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as nothing. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you always see the potential in what others miss.